Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 53 being recorded on October 18, 2022. So this week, we do at least one stream a week, pretty much every week. This week it's looking like we're going to have probably 3 streams. In today's stream, and I'm really trying to be more conscious of this when I'm planning the content for the shows. This started out as I only started doing these streams about 6 months ago. And that was after 2 years of doing non-live videos. Decided to make a foray into the live streaming world. It's been going pretty well. But, trying to figure out how much content to do and etc. Anyway, it's been going well to where I'm thinking in terms of looking at articles for streams specifically and things like that. So thank you all for the support and the people who drop in on Twitch, twitch.tv/socialism S4A, and of course people watching after the fact on YouTube or SoundCloud. Those URLs are on the screen. But yeah, this is not something that the channel was originally based around, so I'm still getting a sense of chopping up the content and making a sensible show from week to week and how many streams it's going to be. I think we're going to do 3 streams this week probably, although literally every time I announce plans on the channel, something else actually winds up happening in practice. But here's the plan so far. Today we're going to do kind of a grab bag, some stories about the railway strike, an update on that because there was another vote, and some various articles about the recession and the economy generally. And then, just some other sort of housekeeping stuff, some thoughts on activism, some thoughts on why I'm even doing this channel, and sort of the state of the left in the United States and honestly also in some similar countries too. Tomorrow we're going to do more of our COVID stuff. There's plenty to talk about, but it's going to be kind of the all-around disease show. We're going to do a bit of a monkeypox catch-up because the monkeypox outbreak of 2022 is waning in the United States. But with that said, there have been 30,000, I think, officially recorded cases and probably many more non-recorded cases. And these include infants. So it's really affected broad swaths of the population. This is really concerning when you consider that previously the largest outbreak in the United States, I think, was under 300 people. So we've now got something, more than 100 times greater in terms of the just how many people were directly infected. So that's really concerning. And then the next thing is there's a big outbreak of Ebola, I think in Uganda right now. And there were 5 planes, which, that in itself is a terrible scenario, and the way that they're handling it sounds really bad from every story that I've heard. It's being very ineptly handled, which of course COVID probably laid the groundwork for. COVID is a case study in how not to manage a global pandemic. They're doing an absolutely shit job. We have a playlist on the channel, COVID-19 for Socialists, and I don't know how many videos, probably 40 or 50 videos in it by now. Been doing a lot of coverage of this. And anyway, there were 5 planes that made it from Uganda to the United States. One of them was in Chicago. There were people who had Ebola-like symptoms. Now, the thing about Ebola, there's a dry stage and a wet stage. In the dry stage, it's, symptoms very similar to COVID as far as, the way that you feel and things like that. Then there's the wet stage. And this is a disease that makes you hemorrhage, makes you bleed. So, eyes, ears, basically anywhere that there's mucous membranes and that there could be some sort of normal fluid discharge. With Ebola, you'll also be bleeding. So it's a really, really bad disease. Anyway, the CDC has activated their alert system for that. And there's also an army of blue checks out there on Twitter saying that, it's not airborne and, trust the system. These are the exact same people who have been saying the same thing about COVID. So is it time to worry about Ebola? Yes. Obviously, we're literally on the first 96 hours of the thing, but it's something to keep an eye on for sure. So we'll review some of the news on that tomorrow along with COVID stuff. And then on the third day, he rested. On the third day, a while ago, the topic of spotting informants in movements and parties and activist circles and things like that came up. And I said that I had some articles on that subject that I wanted to cover that I couldn't find. Well, I did find them. And 3 articles came up that I thought would be, sort of worth it to like cover in a show. So we're going to do that on day 3. So probably we're just going to do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. The normal time is 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. So that is pretty much that. So with that said, let's get into one of the first things that I'd like to cover. Well, you'll notice, this is channel-related things. You'll notice that I haven't posted any audiobooks. I had a bunch of smaller audiobooks that I was planning to post. I started one of them. It was about Korea, and I realized in the course of recording this audiobook, it was Kim Jong-il on having a correct understanding of nationalism, and I realized that in the process of sort of doing the background information for that audiobook, it probably made sense to do a little mini series of like, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 videos about Korean division and then plans for and prospects of Korean reunification and what have the plans been around that. This will kind of be cursory, but we will read 2 primary texts about it and then also some background information. So I was thinking that that was something I could probably just throw up on the channel along with stuff about nationalism, but alas, it turned into a bigger project and I haven't posted anything yet because I want to post it with all that supplementary stuff. I have also recorded about half of Engels' Anti-During Part 1, which is the next entry in the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide, which in a way is sort of the backbone of this channel, and we've been reading through that slowly with many other side readings over the last 2.5 years of doing this channel. I was going to finish the whole thing, or anyway, I'm going to post that one in chapters, kind of like I did with Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. It is very long, and so I'm going to start posting that in chapters, and like I said, I'm done up to about chapter 6 so far, so you can expect that soon. Otherwise, what we've got going is some community posts that there was just some super crushing news I felt out of, it's the World Wildlife Federation UK. Okay, they're sort of bourgeois environmentalism or whatever. That doesn't mean that the facts of what they're saying are wrong. That basically in the last 50 years, 70% of the Earth's animals have been wiped out. That's not entire species necessarily. Some of it's species that are not extinct or endangered, but their population is still way down versus 50 years ago. In some cases it is. And then, of course, in some areas, and we did a whole article on this last stream, in some areas like Latin America and the Caribbean, it's up to like 94% of the animal populations are gone. So we're literally down to 6% of the animal populations that were there 50 years ago. That's staggering. And what's it going to be in 20 years from now? Like, so I realized for me that I haven't completely come to terms emotionally with climate change. Like, intellectually, I've acknowledged it and whatever. And the fact is, all of this stuff, we're so far behind. It is a literal question now as to whether humanity is going to actually solve any of this, or if there will be sort of like a mass die-off of human beings, like due to ecological collapse. I know that there's, it's going to be, whatever does happen is going to be disproportionate. It's already affecting the deliberately underdeveloped world, sometimes called third world, etc. More. It's being caused disproportionately by the more heavily industrialized countries. So sort of the imperial core and stuff like that is causing it, and then the effects are falling on more the victims of imperialism. So this is another way that imperialism is victimizing everybody. The thing is, the Earth is a sphere, and it's a contained ecosystem. It's a contained global system. So yes, like there are countries that are going to be hit first and harder, but eventually it is all going to come back around eventually onto the imperial core, and there's really no avoiding that. So whatever the timeline is, there's different timeline predictions, whatever. I started getting into that bit more, like I said, coming to more of an emotional reckoning of like, what does this really mean? Because if we're talking about 20, 30, 40 years, that's within my lifetime. So this is something that we're definitely going to see in this amount of time. It's not some abstract future thing that we can just entirely avoid. But I realized I had sort of emotionally been avoiding coming to terms with that. And so there was an incident over the weekend where the activist group Just Stop Oil, which is connected, I think I have a visual here. It's connected with Extinction Rebellion, which there's things to criticize about them. But honestly, for the amount of urgency that, there it is, for the amount of urgency that this issue actually should be treated with, it hasn't been getting anything like that day-to-day sense of urgency that people should be feeling about it. And I guess watching a lot of sort of self-described communists online, the way that this was being judged and criticized, I thought was the priorities were wildly off. Why did they go to a museum? Well, here's the thing. And you know what? I have a thread on this. So why don't I'll bring up the thread and we can use this as a jumping off point for some discussion. Yeah, there we go. So again, these things aren't, centered or whatever. But so what I was writing about this, because there's the video there, activist in London spraying orange paint all over an Aston Martin showroom. So this group, it's not like just, people call it performative or whatever. That group also does actions at gas stations and things which are more directly tied to fossil fuel infrastructure. So they really do both. And a lot of really ignorant critics have been acting like this is an either-or question, but it isn't. So you're just sort of betraying your own ignorance there. But the other point about bringing it into spaces where, it's a strategy. What if we made a world where you can't even go to a museum without somebody protesting the fact that the Earth is literally being fucking murdered? So off of that, I wrote, forcibly bringing awareness of the impending uninhabitability of Earth into spaces that aren't designated for political discussion, which are therefore spaces which can easily be tuned out and ignored, is infuriating to those who are determined to block it out and avoid a sense of day-to-day urgency. Earlier this week, a climate collapse protest was held in a museum. Today it's at a car company. And tomorrow, what really concerns the people most infuriated about these early stage protests is that it will reach into their lives, shake them up, and make them need to change. The people afraid of that change see how the media calls these climate emergency activists terrorists, and they see how a cowardly public echoes those calls. Nobody wants to be a target of that kind of hate, however unjustified it is, because after all, the Earth's being murdered and we're part of that Earth. Being made to feel the sense of urgency that could cause them to stand up and participate in some sort of action, terrifying. Extinction Rebellion is the beginning of the beginning on climate action. It's a desperately needed source of action in a time of inertia, and it shouldn't be picked to pieces or just shit on completely before it even gets going. As it grows, socialists must bring to it class consciousness, but without slowing it down. So this is from their website, quote, strategies like petitioning, lobbying, voting, and protest have not worked due to the rooted interests of political and economic forces. Our approach is therefore one of nonviolent, disruptive civil disobedience, since all other means have failed. I agree with that. I agree. And does it sound to you purely like performative liberalism, or does it sound like a step towards people taking a more radical approach? Yes, we have to tie this in ultimately to organized labor, etc. But look at what's going on with organized labor. In the United States, union density, I looked it up today, 10.3% in 2021. That's actually down half a point from 10.8% in 2020. So, and that's the official unionization rate, which includes a lot of the unions which really function more like sort of professional associations. They're not rooted in class struggle, they're not militant. So we're literally talking about maybe 10% or less of the overall U.S. workforce even being unionized. And we see right now, and we're going to talk more about striking later, we see now in the UK, there are some big rail strikes, and there's also, that's what we're going to be talking about in the US, railway workers' strikes. But I mean, the banners are, which is good, it is good, certainly, but the banners are about, protect jobs, protect conditions, protect pay. That is, not incompatible with social imperialism. In other words, it's not revolutionary in any way. It's, trade union consciousness, which is fine as a starting point, but it really has to go beyond that. And we're just barely seeing a resurgence in militancy of that. So we have to acknowledge that. And also we have these urgent problems like climate collapse. That's a really serious problem. So can we wait around entirely, at all, for anybody, for anything? No. And do we have a culture of protest? No, we don't. People roll over and take shit in the U.S. Actually, the year that I started doing S4A, we saw the George Floyd and BLM protests. I thought that was great because people were actually out in the streets for something. Yes, a lot of it wasn't tied to an organization, or pretty weak organizations if they were, but people were at least expressing some healthy sentiment that they were pissed off, and they weren't just going to sit on it anymore. Now, after you get some action going, absolutely, socialists, communists, Marxists step in, direct people towards organizations where we can move away from spontaneity and move into something that's going to be more effective in the long term. But if you don't even have that base of activity in the first place, and I think that shitting on it in the way that it was being shit on absolutely pours cold water on it even getting started, then there's going to be nothing to criticize because people are going to be too afraid to go out. They're going to be afraid of the media and the cops, and they're going to be afraid of the, stars of the left, mocking them. So we need to encourage it. Obviously, yes, criticize it, but you need to have a balance of encouraging people to, rebel without, making them so paralyzed with self-consciousness that nothing is happening, which is really kind of the default right now. Nothing is happening. So I continue. This campaign of disruption of the zombie walk off the cliff of ecocide will have to be tied together with economic and political organizing to break the back of capital, those most responsible for all of this ecological collapse. But we won't grow those ranks without first snapping average people, out of the trance. Everybody right now is in denial, and they've been trained, and they've trained themselves, they've participated in that training to just zombie walk towards ecological apocalypse, basically. There's no sense of day-to-day urgency, and people just don't do anything on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, you do have to kind of snap people out of that trance. This is ultimately a similar discussion to one that I've tried to have on the channel here. It's difficult to have in online, quote, Marxist spaces where everybody's trying to be so hard and so based and everything else. The reality is most people are complete fucking cowards who've never done anything in the real world ever. And that's a fact. And I've tried to hold up that mirror a number of times. People never like hearing it. Anyway, about the value of completely apolitical U.S. workers at least becoming active in the Greens or DSA, not versus joining a Marxist group, but versus doing nothing at all. If that's all that people are ready to do, then so be it, because it's better than doing nothing at all. Because every time that we see an Occupy or a Bernie Sanders or something like that, there is a chunk of people, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15%, but every time a chunk of people breaks off of that movement because they get radicalized to the point where they see through the limits of liberalism and they start seeing on through to the need for communism, okay? So I started out a while ago, this was about 20 years ago, but I started out doing, moveon.org shit, and I moved on up through to eventually becoming much more radical. And that's a real path that happens. You can't just shit on people doing that, because that doesn't acknowledge that a lot of people don't start out communist. They sort of build up to that, especially in a country like the United States where there's anti-communism basically everywhere you turn. People might even be more inclined towards picking up Marxism, but they get hit with 15 anti-Marxist sources, including Noam Chomsky, and these other prominent voices before they even get out of the gate. So there needs to be a lot more patience. And also something else I would like to say is I think that there's a lot of people who superficially learn some kind of Marxism almost exclusively for the purpose of one-upping liberals online. Like, it's like literally learning Marxism to own the libs. But the point of Marxism is not just like posting snide comments toward liberals. The point of it is radical social change, revolution, ending capitalism. And the process of actually radicalizing people, you got to work with the left that you have and just try to bring them along as quickly as you possibly can. Go against the individualism, go against the anarchism, go against the spontaneity, and bring people into class consciousness and all of that stuff. But, anyway. So, like I said there at the bottom, like many, I started out similarly and became communist over time. Why did I become communist? Because I eventually came to feel that while some of the things I encountered in those spaces, like a Greens or whatever, was powerful and moving politically, that there had to be more out there, and I did continue on to it. But I wouldn't have gotten close enough to the more radical stuff to know about it without those steps. In the USA or similar, these are countries with basically fascist politics by default. It's basically the mainstream of politics is some flavor of fascism or fascist collaboration or another. Breaking out of that often involves a process, and oftentimes mistakes are made on people's way over to the left, steps through various forms of liberalism, etc. What ultimately matters is getting people out of it. It might take somebody 5 or 10 years, but, and I think that less time, now that there is more social media, because I'll tell you, 15 years ago, trying to encounter communist literature in the United States, good luck. I was in many activist spaces and info shops and things, and it just wasn't prominent. Communism kind of died in the 90s in many ways and went far underground. So we can bring it back probably, but you got to acknowledge where you're starting from. So I can tell you that when I started out politically, I was very sincere. A lot of it for me was after 9/11, the U.S. was there was this whole kind of thing in the 90s of, for somebody who was more naive, and I was more of a kid, it was like the Cold War was over and, end of history and sort of world peace or whatever. That was kind of the narrative in the United States. And then you see, Bush and Cheney waging war on the, half the world, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And, trying to figure that out. So when I started out, I was very sincere and very concerned about that. And I was starting from a very poor base of information, as most people in the U.S., or it's probably similar in countries like the U.K., are. But, it was very hard to access any kind of quality information about socialism, the links between capitalism and war, etc. It is becoming more common to find that now. So if you're 16 and you just got online 3 years ago, and, you're now a, Maoist or, people come up with just crazy labels. It's you might not be aware of, this stuff was just not always as accessible as it is. I was talking to a Dengist Ancom the other day. I know it's dumb, but people say dang. Anyway, people come up with these sort of crazy things because they're reading this and they're reading that, and you think that it's maybe just always been this way, and it really hasn't. So anyway, that non-socialists are taking action against climate collapse is wonderful compared to the hundreds of millions sleepwalking into oblivion and calling it a Chinese hoax, shit like that. What communists must do, as always, is to provide helpful, tactical, and organizational advice, not to pour cold water on it. I was honestly just despondent at seeing most of the responses to that, and I talked to a few people who changed their minds on it. But it made me come away from it going literally, why am I doing this fucking channel? And so I know why I'm doing it though, and I updated the S4A. Channel description as a result. So I haven't updated it in a while. So it says S4A exists to go beyond memes and CNN reaction videos. which, you get out of like the SOCDEM gang, for example, familiarizing viewers with the ideas and practices of the international revolutionary struggle against capitalism. Our content is partly human-read Marxist theory and history audiobooks and discussions, and partly news, current events, and commentary videos. S4A began as a left unity outlet, but found that to be unworkable. We lean Marxist-Leninists, but are currently a Marxist unity channel that seems to be about the highest practical level of unification. Like, I'll make it very clear, we're not Trotskyists here. I don't auto-ban Trots, but like, anyway, that's about as close as we can, or like I said, it's like, some people are like diehard MLMs, other people are different things. I mean, I have my opinions, and the channel probably will express that in some way or another, but we are trying to do some sort of sincere Marxist unity. Again, we're at such a preliminary stage of building anything. It really remains to be seen whether a strong communist movement will emerge out of all of this or not. We really don't know at this point. But anyway, so why am I doing this channel even? I really had to think about it again. There are two basic points to S4A's mission. One is to help willing individuals to understand the societal reasons for their problems and suffering, how capitalism is driving inequality and oppression. I literally ran out of characters on this, but class exploitation, etc. And to help them resist feeding into the systems which are oppressing them. So that's something that I know I can do, and I know that this does work for people because I get this feedback from people. Like, hey, I basically grew up in a country like, my dad says society doesn't exist, or whatever. Like, that's kind of the level of not just class, but like social consciousness in the United States. And, your channel helped me to realize that there's like an international history to the struggle against capitalism. And it has clarified, because people can wind up really confused. You suffer because of capitalism, and then you suffer additionally because you're confused about what's even happening. So I know that it can impact the lives of individuals. And that to me is worth it to do. It's worth it to do. It's not always worth having to listen to some of the shit opinions that come back to me in the course of running this channel. But, it's worth it because, like I said, I was out there once very confused about what was going on in the world. And, I ran with bad information for a while and bad political ideologies. And eventually, connected the dots with the help of people more experienced and knowledgeable than I was. And so I'm trying to give back. And I know that point one is actually having some kind of an effect, at least alleviating some of the suffering of individuals to at least understand what the fuck is happening in their lives. So, and then two, to the extent that socialist organizing in a country as politically backward as the US is even possible, and to me there is somewhat of a question mark on that, to advocate for a DemExit and LeftCoalition. For more info, see the link, and finally, comments are moderated on the channel. So that's why I'm doing this channel. A lot of people, I don't know, seem to be confused about that, but it's like we're trying to do basic informational awareness, raising the bar, getting people out of just listening to like the Humanist Report and the, elect better Democrat strategy. We still, the left still by and large in the U.S. has refused to renounce the Democratic Party, which is not left at all. So that to me is still the fundamental task of the stage that we are at. So I have a thread about that. It's actually the thread that is linked there. So let me go ahead and read that. What did I save it as? Here. Okay. So let me smallify that. I don't know why these keep coming out as like random sizes, but hopefully fixed in the next stream. When I say that the fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break with the Democratic Party and recreate the Bernie moment outside of the Democratic Party through a left coalition, this is what something like that could look like. Stadium-filling crowds in support of a far-left political message. So those pictures there, you can see this is reposted from In Defense of Communism out of Athens, Greece. Huge crowds during the third and last day of the 48th KNE Odagitis Festival. There's a treatment for that now. Thousands of people attended the large political event, with the keynote speaker being Dimitris Koutsoumbas, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Greece, KKE. So this is a site I've been referencing more and more. I think they're one of the better communist parties in the world, and the In Defense of Communism site is definitely worth reading. They don't go for sort of the lesser of two imperialist evils take, etc. So those pictures of, like I said, is the annual festival. The U.S. left is fragmented. The parties are small, and many of them are revisionist, or they're not even Marxist at all. That's the state of the U.S. left. There's small parties, it's fragmented, many of the parties are revisionist, or they're not even Marxist. And the general level of education and class consciousness of the working class is pretty terrible overall. But noting that, and we just have to be honest with ourselves, if you're running a science experiment, you can't just say, okay, we're going to be, combining this amount of, zinc citrate with hydrochloric acid, and we're going to do it in an atmosphere of this gas. And then somebody points out, well, that's not the gas that you actually have in that environment. And you say, screw you, we're not going to care about that. Well, no, you actually have to understand the conditions that you're working in. Otherwise, you're not going to understand the effects of your actions. So anyway, it's not to bash, it's just to point out a fact. But noting that, we have to start somewhere. I believe that a left coalition could be it, and I've taken to using this hashtag. People have seen me use the Revolution 2030 hashtag. I've added this to it because this is the basic idea. I think if this doesn't work for the U.S. left, I'm really not sure what would, and that's my honest opinion. I'm trying to be helpful. Anyway, when there is a strong communist party that is close to the working masses and following a correct line consistently for a long period of time, two things which incidentally are related to each other, then of course it is preferable to recommend that party to politically inclined workers. Until then, okay, we have to build up some kind of a base for action. Otherwise, what does the left do? Just snipes at each other on social media, and then has their book clubs and whatever, but it doesn't necessarily build beyond that. The intervening years would likely be challenging as parties decide to enter the left coalition or not. They decide how the coalition would be internally governed. They decide what demands to make in their shared coalition campaign and how to act on them. But it would mean progress for the left. Bernie Sanders is a coward who abandoned the left for the capitalist-controlled Democratic Party, where change is not and never has been possible, and he knows that. You can, in fact, find statements from him back around 1990 saying that. It was explaining why he was an independent. But what we learned through the Bernie Sanders campaigns, 2015 and 16, and then 2019 and 20, is that there are stadium-filling crowds just about everywhere who want change. And some of them aren't that radical, but some of them are. I know because I talked to you as you came into the S4A audience. So I know that that's a real thing. It's an observed thing. I've seen it myself, and I've spoken with people who represent that. So we're talking about the USA here. It's one of the most reactionary countries around. So of course the average worker is not fully in support of socialism yet. They're not even necessarily even aware of what that actually means. But for those who have made steps into the left, it is time to continue that journey outside the Democratic Party. So here's where terror strikes into the hearts of many SOCDEMs, or even many other people who would be socialists, but they won't get organized, they won't join a party, they won't do anything, because two-party system, it's not going to do anything. Well, we know for sure that doing nothing will do nothing. We're not as sure that doing something will also do nothing. Anyway, for many who are aware of U.S. politics, stepping outside the Democratic Party means stepping into a terrifying wasteland of capitalist slander, fringe spectator status, basically isolated irrelevancy. That's why we would make this step together, united, as a left coalition. That's the end of the thread. Each party is pretty small. But together we would not be so small. And I think it's probably the only real hope at this point of making the left, having the left exceed its current standing, which is about where it's been forever. We don't want to let this recede too far into the past. Whether it was, again, Occupy came and went. Why? They wouldn't adopt a platform. They wouldn't I mean, there were certain themes that came up over and over again, but they wouldn't adopt a platform because they didn't want to be, quote, single issue. Okay, great. Platforms are necessarily not single issue, but whatever. And so it came and it went. It was very, anarchist and individualist oriented. Bernie Sanders, because those issues that Occupy was talking about and protesting, they're economic in nature, they do come out of capitalism. And people at least started talking about capitalism again. This was about 10 years ago, around that time. Well, great, that was a step forward. But, we can see it getting increasingly, if you zoom way out on the timeline, getting more and more organized. Again, to me, this is my take, is I think that a left coalition is probably the most likely thing. All these parties would have to get together because none of them are capable of, the Greens are probably the largest party that I would consider left. They don't take the corporate money. They have a right wing, which is pretty shitty. It's more the contrarian populist stuff. It's not a Marxist party. There's petty bourgeois elements in it. There's, a lot of problems with the Greens. I consider it the starting point of the U.S. left, at least, as far as people who have at least made that step outside the Democratic Party. You do get your sort of, your sort of people who read a lot of Glenn Greenwald and shit like that. Obviously, that has to be combated. But anyway, you want to get somewhere as a left and not just, have this be about highly individualistic, snarky tweets and who can make it to 100,000 subscribers or followers first. Do you want actual change out in society? I think that this is probably how it would go. I'm also not here to I'm just here to propose the concept. I'm really not here to dictate any of the particulars. But you look at something like, the Howie Hawkins platform of the Green Party. Compare it to PSL's platform that they were running on for their sort of, protest campaign for the presidency. There's a lot of overlap. I think that there's definitely something that a left coalition could agree on to try to build the left into a real force. And to clarify, because I got somebody on this thread who was really espousing a bunch of nonsense. They're like, oh no. Basically their points were this. One, we can't make a coalition because any organization is just going to be infiltrated by the FBI, whatever. Okay. So capitalist police, capitalist law enforcement, that's a reality. We have to exist with it. Oh no, they set up cops. We must give up. No? What are you doing? It's a reality that we have to contend with. You have to deal with that. You have to understand that. You have to live with that. And you have to try to organize anyway. Their basic thing was oh no, we can't organize. We have to just, quote, and just, let's, in quotes and underline, just go after some of the Democratic Party safe seats. Oh, okay. So you want to not organize, but, quote, just win some congressional seats. So literally how? Waving a magic wand? It makes no sense. You have to organize, and you're never going to be able to do that within the Democratic Party. And then a lot of the left parties are too small. Like I said before, when there is a strong Communist Party with ties to the masses that's been following a correct line for a good period of time, then obviously it's preferable. If I was in Greece, I'd be saying, join the KKE probably, right? I mean, we don't have something like that here. And we do have a lot of people who, there's just not a strong communist history in the United States. We have a lot of people who are left, but they think at least currently that they're anti-communist. Now, channels like this exist to challenge that anti-communism, which is usually wrong-headed, based on myths and capitalist propaganda, misinformation. So we want to challenge that anti-communism. But along the way, people do need to get organized because there's a lot of people way to the left of both the Democratic and Republican parties, and of course the libertarians are even worse. But there's not organization and, and this and that. The point is not necessarily so much winning elections, although I'm sure you could win some local elections with a left coalition for sure. The point of it, fundamentally, is to make a space for proletarian organizing that's free of bourgeois influence, or as close as you can get to a space that's free of bourgeois influence in a country like the United States, where fucking everybody carries around bourgeois influence on their phones with them literally everywhere. So, I mean, bourgeois influence seeps into, it's very strong in this country. But to make at least a political space that doesn't have bourgeois money coming into it, that would be step one. There you can actually strategize about class struggle. You can actually do things independently of capital. And some of that might mean running in some elections, but a lot of it wouldn't. So the idea is to get people organized. Now, look, I know a lot of people, you're just addicted to your phones and fucking terrified of real world action. I know you are. And you're not going to want to hear it. And instead of like looking yourself in the mirror and trying to confront some of that toxic crap that you're carrying around with you, you're going to like go and squawk in the comments instead. I'm aware of that. I'm also not going to publish your comments. We need to move beyond this. I am completely fucking sick of it, and we don't have time for it anymore. You know, I've mentioned before, there was this thread from Allison Metzger a while ago talking about how, you know, climate change is so urgent that we don't have time to organize for a revolution. The problem with that, as we discussed, is the politicians who exist now aren't doing anything about it. And literally the type of effort that would be required to make them do something is literally the exact same level of intensity and even methodology as it would take to organize a revolution. So either way, this is the direction we have to go in. No effects are possible without this kind of this kind of organization, meaning a really broad-based, mobilizing tens of millions of people, really popular mobilization. Starting with that and building the class consciousness as we go. A lot of people are trying to put the cart before the horse. It's not getting us anywhere. And so we had Occupy, it came and it went. We had Bernie Sanders, it came and it went. It's on us now. This has to happen. The next step has to happen outside the Democratic Party, because we've seen what happened. You can't do anything in that party. This has been going on for decades, forever and ever. The Democratic Party, I think that they first won the presidency in 1828. Okay? They've been around a while. They're not going to fucking do anything for us. They're not. Okay? That's why Biden is president. That's why he was the candidate. They're not going to do anything for working people. You would have to, you know, in the process of building the left, make it where we're real contenders for influence and attention. You start making them listen to us that way, but ultimately we just surpass them in power. That's the goal. All right? And we go on to abolish capitalism. And that's obviously all the audiobooks and things like that we do on the channel. That's we have extensive discussions of what that process is about. So anyway, that's, I guess, about the end of that. And let's go into the chat a bit before we get into any of the stories this week. In fact, already, like I said, you know, best laid plans. It just doesn't always work out. I'm just going to leave it like that because I don't feel like resizing. All right, fine, I'll resize it. There we go. Yeah, it's not fully resized, but that's a little better than it was. All right, what's going on in the chat before we go on to anything else? Why is it still fucking moving? There we go. No, it's not. Okay. Yeah, like I said, just trying weekend. It's like, you know, reading this news and, you know, I'm there in the morning, like, just, you know, having some breakfast, like having something to drink, waking up, just reading this, like, how do people think change happens? I don't get it. You know, if we had like a fully formed communist movement, fine, but we're not even close. We're not even close. I don't get how people think, you know, things happen. All right, a bit off topic from this. Somebody asked, question about difference between settler colonialism and fascism. You made a point of saying that they were not the same thing. Why do Marxists need to understand the difference? Seems like they are very similar. They are both bad for people of color and workers, and both use mob violence against minorities to preserve capitalism, land ownership. Is the important distinction about the level of development of empire. I think you mean Israel is a settler colonial project, yet they're backed by empire. Well, imperialism is highly advanced capitalism that okay, let me start over. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, as Lenin's book title explains. And he gets into the particulars of its characteristics in that book, as well as in some other writings. But it involves, like, once capitalism has completely been built up within the home territory, it has to keep expanding. So exporting capital and other characteristics, you know, there's certain hallmarks of it. So that's imperialism. Settler colonialism is more specifically about moving a population into an area probably forcibly displacing the existing, like there's usually some kind of existing population there, and displacing it. So fascism is arguably the ideology of capitalism in decline. So highly advanced capitalism, in other words, imperialism, it becomes fascist. So we did this a few streams ago on the class nature of fascism, where we read the Politsturm article on that. Settler colonialism is more specific about colonizing a piece of land, moving in a settler population into it. So that's really the distinction there. So yeah, Israel is a settler colonial project. Why? There was an existing population living in Palestine, and then they brought in settlers to colonize it. That was a completely different population to take it over. So imperialism is more about financial war and sometimes military war, expanding capitalist operations into other countries and things like that. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Happy to answer a follow-up question. Did I hear that the University of Boston created a strain of COVID that's 80% lethal? No, I have not heard that. Did I hear about the French general strike happening right now? Yes. Yes, I did. It is in protest of inflation, is what I caught. And, speaking of cultures of protest, the French have a good culture of protest. It's not explicitly communist, but, the French, when they're upset about something, will get out in the streets about it, at least. That's something you rarely see in the United States. Now, part of that is because in the United States, the police will fucking massacre you in the street. And, so there's some sort of, some differences in norms and laws and things like that can account for some of those differences. But bottom line is they do have a much better culture of protest. It's not necessarily, leading to revolution, but revolutions don't happen without protest. So, if you think that, you think you can have a revolution without protests, I'm not really sure what you're thinking there. That's kind of where I'm coming from before. Is these things do not drop out of the sky, or because fucking Tucker Carlson made white people angrier on on cable news or something. It's it swells up out of sustained ongoing protests about a basic fundamental thing about society that can no longer continue as it is. Wide swaths of the population recognize a need for change, and that's kind of the beginning of it. Now, whether that turns into a revolution or not is partly due to, are there very class-conscious people, a vanguard, if you will, who are able to win the trust of the masses and guide those protests and rebellions into the most productive revolutionary direction possible. But without the protest being there in the first place, there's nothing to guide. And that's kind of the point. Australia also just had their first ever retail workers strike just today, I think. I didn't even see that, so that's cool. Been thinking about a way we could bridge the gap between English and Spanish-speaking comrades, but my Spanish is poor. Okay. Was wondering if you might consider putting out a call for Spanish-speaking comrades to make Spanish versions of the audiobooks. Nothing's stopping anybody, but, I've put out calls for people to collaborate, even in English, and it hasn't gone. You're getting S4A because I'm kind of fanatical about this. I, for about 20 years, just can't stop thinking about this stuff. And I think I feel that sense of urgency. I don't know. People should do stuff. And I have put out general tips on the channel on last July 2021. There's some, I did a criticism of Bad Mouse nuking their channel. And I did a video after that about how to start a channel. And probably most of that advice still stands. But yeah, please do. Anything anybody does is, in that regard, putting out basic educational materials, I think there is still a need for that, for sure. Yeah, the animal die-off thing is extremely salient propaganda. It was for me. I think it's, as you say, not complicated. It hits you in the face. It's if that's been in the last 50 years, where are we going to be in another 10 or 20? it's extraordinarily concerning. So, anyway, welcome to all the people who are dropping in for the first time. We got 51 people in the stream today, so that's good. Yeah, it seems like all the news about monkeypox died on my feed after the blow up of the right tying it to homosexuality. I dang near forgot about it. Yeah, that was the intended purpose, was like, oh, it's the damn queers. Like, sorry for lapsing into like more of a southern accent there. That's always well, we know the South is more of a stronghold of that sort of overt reaction. But yeah, I mean, there's other areas as well. It's just what sort of the classical example. But yeah, it's speaking of despondent, it's just like watching people fall for the shit over and over and over again. It's fucking exhausting. It is exhausting. You know, I do feel an urgent need to do what I can out here, but it's like, holy shit, it's depressing. Just watching the like, you know, low critical thinking, the low just low ability to reason critically. That's, I guess, what I'm going to keep coming back to. People fall for the dumbest shit over and over again. Still freaking out about COVID at work since I'm in a room with 50 people and none of them wear masks, not even out of respect. Respect? What are you thinking? This is the United States. And everyone is just ignoring it, even in my union. Even Mexico is trying to get rid of its mask mandate, which is disastrous. Yeah. Do I ever plan to read more stuff about the Sino-Soviet split? Yes, eventually. I still haven't even done the like Trotsky-Stalin conflict. There's a lot of current events to cover, and you know that's been getting more of the attention right now. So, the countries that contribute the least to climate change are the first to suffer from it. Found the first troll, by the way. Just a reminder, don't feed the troll. I will come in and take care of them. I can imagine the conspiracy con artists now. There's animals. You really believe these globalist environmentalists? I saw a squirrel with a donut the other day. One of the areas that I heard it's like pretty key is insects. Like apparently the air used to be a lot thicker with insects. Now that does sound annoying, but it's also the sign of a healthy ecosystem. Somebody's asking about sort of difference, like, yeah, imperialism is inherently bad. Lenin had a book explaining how it's the highest stage of capitalism. Somebody's asking about, is there lesser evil imperialism like Russia or China? You know, them acting imperialistically as their capitalism grows and grows. Is it going to be less bad than the U.S.? No, it's capitalism. Capitalism, as the last statement that we put up on the community post actually about this went, both are worse. That's the best way you can sum it up. Yeah, there have already been 6 extinctions. We need to make capitalism extinct. And maybe nature will do that for us. It would be a terrible tragedy, you know. It's, I don't know, you know, is it possible that human beings simply are not smart enough to, you know, putting aside theories of revolution and the proletariat, you know, and eventually inheriting the mantle of capitalism and all of that, putting that aside for a minute, it's possible that even the collective intelligence of the entire human race, let's say that we had a proletarian revolution, we completely abolished capitalism, we achieved global communism, it's still possible that the collective intelligence of the human species still is insufficient to run industry in a way that does not kill us. It's possible. We still need to work towards it because we know for damn sure that capitalism cannot do it. The collective intelligence and motivations of the bourgeoisie, we already have a mountain of evidence showing that they're not capable of it. The profit motive / profit mandate always relegates science and ecology to a lower priority. They always put short-term profits first. And there's no way you can run even green capitalism that way. Green capitalism does not exist. It's not a thing. It's not going to do anything that we need as far as like saving well, preventing destruction. You want to say save the planet because that's the way that it's often couched. Literally, the planet would be fine if we left it the fuck alone. So it's stopping the destruction of the planet that's really the framing that's needed. So, like I said, it's possible that the collective intelligence of the global proletariat still wouldn't be enough not to murder the earth. That said, we need to at least try that because we know that capitalism is not going to do it. We know that for sure now. We have plenty of evidence for that. And again, I think it's possible that humanity could figure out a way not to like kill ourselves in the environment. Because again, we are part of the environment. But I'm just saying, we might be leading up to this anyway, but we have to at least try for socialism. There's somebody in the comments talking about bothering average civilians. So literally the point is creating a sense of urgency. If you are defending average sort of middle class people who don't want to be bothered, quote unquote, about the planet being murdered and literally the possibility of mass extinction within our lifetimes, within the lifetimes of you and me. If you think that like not bothering people about that is like, that's the higher priority, I don't know if there's hope for you. I really don't. Yeah, the Biden administration warning about eco-terrorism. Literally, as soon as you disrupt profits, you're a terrorist. That's basically what this is. And yeah. I saw Kyle Kalinske on the RM Brown stream, I don't know what that is, mocking them and pretending that he's some kind of revolutionary as if he actually supported revolutionary action. Yep. Oh, God, there's somebody in the chat. Get the fuck out of my chat. Get the fuck out of my chat promoting like, it's a conspiracy to make activists look bad. Fuck you. Honestly. Oh, you're suspicious. Good for you. But anyway, I just can't. I can't. I joined a public hunger strike to fight environmental racism in Chicago, and it was weird because people get real funny about that stuff. It upsets people. It's not materially affecting them, and it was, yet it was impactful. Oh, it was performative, yet it was impactful. Lots of hate and stuff even directly to my face, but I feel like it was somehow hijacking a part of the human brain, where if you don't pick up rocks and sticks, you're going to starve yourself, and other humans literally care all of a sudden. Rocks work too. I made content on my social media while I was on my fast too, educate on politics and health, but have taken a long break in order to sharpen my politics and educating specifically on that issue. Google Chai Hunger Strike and Stop General Iron. I remember Stop General Iron. They moved a polluting car shredding plant out of a rich white neighborhood and into a poor black and brown neighborhood. Yeah. S4A hammering home for people to get up and organize got me off my ass, so I appreciate all the hard work. Well, good for you. I mean that. Good for you. People will literally just sit there and like watch the end of the world on TV until like, the broadcasts go out, and then they'll be like, I'm bored. And I just felt like it's profits over people and global polluters coming home to roost, and these kids are on hunger strike. I had some experience fasting, so I was like, how can I not join? After I joined, some members developed health complications. They wanted to stop copycat strikers, and they ended after a month. Yeah, fasting can be pretty dangerous, but... Now, Maria, you're saying, I kind of disagree with environmentalists' demands. You realize you're painting with an extraordinarily broad brush there. They're pro-capitalist business solutions without even thinking whether they're environmentally effective. I would definitely need some more some more details on that, because environmentalists is not a monolith. What do you think about the validity of suburban socialist and communist party chapters? It seems like most orgs completely ignore suburbs and focus on the cities. I mean, honestly, you get the most bang for the buck in the cities, and it's people least likely to sort of own property and be proletarian. But I mean, there's people also concerned about class exploitation in other places. So this is actually another point about climate change too. People are like, oh wow, an oil heiress contributed money to just stop oil, therefore it's completely invalid. So 2 points. Probably she has some guilt about where her family's money comes from, and is she like dictating all of their actions because of that? If you have evidence for that, then show it. Otherwise, shut the fuck up and stop playing doubtmonger, because you're just literally being a merchant of doubt at that point. At a time when, hey, you got some better idea, fucking do it. I'm happy to cover it. Go do it. But the other thing is that even some bourgeois are concerned about climate change. Obviously, their system is what's causing it. And their system, within the confines of capitalism, you can't stop climate change. You just simply can't. So we know that they're never going to be able to lead for that reason. But that said, some capitalists, some rich people, are legitimately concerned about climate change. Their system is never going to be able to end that, so again, they shouldn't be in the leadership. But that's not to say like, oh, a rich person is concerned about climate change, therefore, it's a non-issue. If you fall into like, that's not good critical thinking, okay? It's really not. Anyway, it seems like most orgs completely ignore suburbs and focus on the cities. The distance is a big reason. People aren't active, and many poor and working people don't have the transportation to the city to do activism. There are plenty of leftists and working class people in suburbs waiting to be organized. That's true even in states that like don't have any large cities, or like there'll be one small to medium sized city in like the whole state. Those states, not every state is like a New York or a California or something. So yeah, there's whole chunks of the country where there really aren't any cities, or there's only sort of at best a medium sized city that in some other states would just be like a large town or something. Yeah, it's valid. I mean, for sure. There's class exploitation going on everywhere, not just in cities. But I think that, again, this is a symptom of there are just very few socialists around. So, even in the cities, it can be hard to round up 100 people sometimes for a meeting. In a location where there's not hundreds of thousands of people living closely together, all the more so, So, I mean, it's valid, to have a suburban or rural socialist and communist party chapter, definitely. But the problem is that a very small percentage of the population right now is really interested in these topics to the point where they would form or join a party. So, yeah, there's nothing invalid about it. It's just like we're a very, very, very small portion of the population right now. All right, we can hold off on the Ukraine-Russia stuff today. There's a bit. People are just sort of coming in here with. It's not really on topic. The problem is the vast majority of Americans aren't socialists. Yeah, so I mean, that's true. I have a feeling this is a troll, but no, it's what I was just saying, actually. We need to not overestimate, like, we need to try to build the movement while not overestimating it. And I feel like a lot of people are, again, just putting the cart before the horse in a lot of ways. No, the hammer and sickle is not a Soviet well, it's not like a Russian symbol exclusively, but speaking English. Yeah, it's a global symbol. So, anyway. Now, somebody else mentioned the COVID thing. Scientists making a strain of COVID that was much more lethal. We covered a thing about a mouse study where in I think it was 7 generations of infection, like they had mice, and I don't like animal studies, just want to say that, but it was a mouse study where they infected mice with a coronavirus which was not fatal to mice. Okay, it would cause, flu-like symptoms, if you will, in the mice, but it was not lethal. And so they infected the mice, then let the virus spread in their body. Then they harvested the virus again. Then they took that virus and then they gave it to more mice. Anyway, in 7 generations, I want to say we covered this back in like December or January. It'll be in that COVID-19 for Socialists playlist. In 7 generations, or was it 5? It was single digits generations of infection. It became fatal. So they were able to achieve like a significant mortality rate, and they were not genetically engineering in like a direct gene editing way. They were not gene editing the virus. They were just letting it spread basically in the mice. And in 7 generations, it achieved a much higher mortality rate. This is why you don't let these things spread. One of the things we're going to be covering tomorrow is about the BQ1 and the BQ11 strains, which are descendants of BA5. So the bivalent booster should have some activity against them. But the BQ1 and BQ11 strains, the monoclonal antibody treatments that we have are completely ineffective against them. And the CDC on the Nowcast, that's their big infographic that it shows the proportions of the different strains that are in circulation, and at the bottom it has the map of the 10 regions of the United States with the pie charts. You've seen me put it up before. So on that chart, they are supposed to put in any variant that is 1% or higher of the overall COVID load in the United States. Well, it turns out BQ1 and BQ11 have been over 1% for like several weeks now, and they just retroactively updated the map. There's like controversy over, and people are arguing over whether it was deliberate or not. But right now, BQ1 and BQ11 are both at about 5.7% of the overall COVID load. That's a massive surge of strains that the monoclonal antibodies aren't effective. So if you're under 65, the Paxlovid may not do anything for you. And the monoclonal, so we're getting into a situation where we don't have treatments. And it's because we're letting it spread. So anyway. I think LeftCoalition could work in U.S. in the short term, but are there enough left forces there? I mean, if we didn't try that, what would work? You know what I mean? So in other words, we know that individually the parties don't seem to be big enough to make a huge impact. And we also know we need to do something concerted outside the Democratic Party. Again, Occupy attracted huge demonstrations. Bernie Sanders attracted stadium-filling crowds literally everywhere he went. We know that there are large portions of the population which are in support of some level of pretty major change to the U.S. system. Some of it as communists, we would consider baby steps, but it's change that both GOP and Dems, and obviously the financial interests which own and control them through the donations and everything, they're completely controlled by 1% money. Go to Open Secrets. I think it's opensecrets.org. You can see who donates to the parties. They vigorously oppose. We don't even have universal health care in the United States. And, so that's where we're at. Yet 70% of the population supports it. I mean, even some amount of Republicans support it. That's how much the government does not, and the two parties that are the government, do not listen to people. So, we know that the existing left parties don't seem to have enough clout or people, any of them, to break through that. A left coalition has not been tried yet. Not really. Really, I can't think of anything really even like it. But it would, anything that's going to gain traction and become kind of a household word and get people talking, because that's how Bernie was so effective. People are like, oh, there's somebody in the race talking about all the stuff that people want. And, of course, many people also were like, well, he's talking about socialism, but, is he really a socialist? And then they went on to real socialism. Maybe they became part of the S4A audience or something else, whatever. I mean, that happened too. All of that was a good thing. It was good momentum. But it needs to keep happening. And obviously, I think Bernie Sanders and AOC and all those people, they hit their limit because they're completely unwilling to move outside the Democratic Party. And where is working within the Democratic Party getting us? Nowhere. There's no momentum there at all. Literally within 48 hours of Bernie Sanders dropping out of the presidential primary, Medicare for All was never mentioned on cable news again. This was 2.5 years ago. And so therefore, it was like Bernie Sanders had his foot in the door for all this left messaging that is left of the current status quo. It would be leftward movement for the United States. And ever since he dropped out of the race, there was no more obligation for the media to cover any of that. He was forcing the issue that they clearly didn't want to talk about. How do we know they didn't want to talk about it? Well, they didn't talk about it before he ran, and they didn't talk about it after he dropped out. So clearly, unless forced, they will not have the discussion. Now, again, these people in the Democratic Party, once they get in and once the primaries are over, the carrots, on the little fishing pole that they're holding out to the left, get retracted, and then they bring out the stick instead, and they start beating us. So we need to move on beyond the Democratic Party. And again, I think that the parties, which are not the same and don't need, the parties don't need to merge. That's what I'm trying to say. PSL and CPUSA and whoever the fuck else don't need to merge. They can stay independent parties and they should, because people are going to be attracted to one over the other, whether it's organizing methods, whether it's just their overall politics, whatever it is, people are going to feel attracted more to one party than another. I don't think merging really makes sense. I'm not calling for that at all. But a coalition where parties get to keep their independence and integrity, but for the sake of the coalition, come up with a shared governance structure. They're still entering it as their parties, or organizations, or whoever the fuck joins it. But, there is a sort of shared framework for what they're going to work on as a coalition. Individuals form organizations form coalitions. It's sort of the next level up from that. And I don't know, I know that some of these parties have had membership bumps, but the idea is to take it here to the next level, because there, I think, is a lot of room for collaboration. There is a lot of overlap. And I think it would be mutually beneficial to everybody, whether it's like trot orgs, which, whatever, whatever party this is, they would all mutually benefit from the shared exposure and from the shared momentum. So, and again, it speaks for itself. Occupy happened, but it didn't get organized, so it faded out. Bernie Sanders happened, a lot of momentum, a lot of people were really impacted by the left propaganda put out during the Sanders campaign. Obviously, as communists, we would criticize it, like Bernie Sanders wasn't a communist. But it was leftward momentum in a country that is hugely stagnant and where people are just completely despondent about the state of left politics. So, having a left coalition involving actual socialists and not tied to the Democratic Party, to me, it seems like the obvious next step that everybody would want. Again, I think there's a lot of room for mutual benefit out of that from everybody that would get involved. We have things today like the, what's it called? The Progressive International. I mean, it exists. Do we hear anything from it? I don't know what the deal is. Did my audio just change? I feel like I just heard like a big change in the, I don't know if it's just my headphones, but I feel like it just got a lot louder. So I see no real downside to this. I see only upsides. So next comment, I tell people who are dead set on, quote, building the Democratic Party to volunteer. If the Democrats are going to be reformed, you would need to volunteer in order to get progressives in. Yeah, it's not going to, I mean, this has just been done so many times. How many times are you going to repeat a failed experiment? You would need to volunteer in order to get progressives in. More than likely, you will sink in effort for no gain. That's what I'm saying. And you will see the error in building the Dems. So literally, there's no reason to do this after Bernie Sanders. Like, we saw how Democrats treat the left. if if you didn't get it during the Bernie Sanders campaigns, then you're never gonna fucking get it. I don't know what else people need to see at this point. You see AOC, like, we're going to bring the ruckus, and then it's been fucking crickets. Like, they just support Biden, basically. Where's the outcry on COVID or the housing crisis or anything? So, yeah, I mean, anyway. I don't know why anybody is still trying to learn that lesson. What we need to do, those of us who have learned the lesson, is move beyond, make the left coalition, and give people a fucking alternative, because a lot of people are just waiting for that alternative. And to be, to give those people their criticism as well, stop waiting and help build it. But the fact is, a lot of people are not leaders, they're followers, and they need something to follow. So, those of us who are leaders, let's give them something to follow. And also, things need first followers. After something has been organized, people need a model of how to follow it. That is just something that works. But yeah, we need to put it out there and show people getting involved, and more people will join in. But anyway, I've recently started a new job, and I'm already sickened by the anti-union rhetoric. They even went mask off by saying that all unions are bad for retail. They probably use retail as a euphemism for capitalism. Yeah, I mean, you can find online, like, I know some of the famous ones are like Target. They do a big, like, anti-union video that there's leaked copies of it online. I mean, it's fucking garbage, but, like, the fact that it works on anybody speaks to, like, the low level of class consciousness right now. Yeah, so I agree with this comment, Olives. If they're still doing that shit with the Democrats after volunteering for Bernie, then, what are they, like, what are they doing? And that's what I'm saying is, like, Bernie Sanders and AOC should be all the proof you need. Bernie Sanders ran fucking twice for president. We have, like, a wealth of information from how the Democrats treated the left both times. They're not our friends. I don't know what else to tell you, Somebody who's really stuck on this, share your thoughts, but I mean, I don't get it. But the fact is, we don't need to just wait around for those people, because plenty of people did move on from the Dems. What we need to do, those of us who moved on from the Dems, is get more organized. And, I'm always encouraging people to join parties and organizations, and then beyond that, form a coalition of the parties. Because, a lot of places, there will be, like, nominal party existence in an area, but it'll be 6 or 8 people. Well, you can't do that much. So get together with the other groups, and maybe you get 100 people. Well, maybe you can do something then. So, is there an S4A Discord server? There is not. At this time, I don't want one. People have offered. I don't use Discord a lot, and it would really be going out of my way to do it. And people have offered to, like, make one. I don't really, at this stage, want stuff going on in S4A's name that I'm not involved with. So, no. So please don't. That's my statement. Please don't. In fact, I'll come down hard on you if you do. You will probably regret doing it. All right, regarding organizing, what do you think of the idea of using the Postal Service to distribute propaganda? Is it actually a good idea, or would it be better to take a different route? I know somebody, I don't know if you're the same person that was writing to me about this in DMs somewhere. I forget if it was Patreon or Twitter. I'm not totally clear on what you were proposing. So I was still thinking about the comments you sent, and it wasn't clear to me, so. I'm skipping the questions on the Sino-Soviet split today. I mean, some people were upset about the extent of de-Stalinization by Khrushchev and considered it revisionist. Some people were concerned about other things that Khrushchev said, like peaceful coexistence with the West and things like that. Some people think that Mao was just getting, like, haughty and it was sort of like a battle of egos of some kind. Like, there's different ideas. I think that we can say that it was the beginning of some bad trends, and there probably was a better resolution to it, I would say. But yeah, we'll cover that in more depth later. I don't think socialism is popular in the USA. Will it be more popular in the near future? Well, it is already more popular than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and so that's part of what we're trying to do on the channel. Is the socialist Marxist left demonstrably, objectively grew between 2010 and today. So objectively, there are more people who, when polled, consider socialism favorably. Now, they're going to have different ideas on what they think socialism is. But prior to that, in the 2000s or in the 90s, if you ran that poll in the USA on, like, what do you think about socialism, the responses would have been much more negative. And they're much more positive now. So again, we're trying through S4A to do some education about Marxism, Leninism, and other things that are closer to actual communism and effective socialist movements around the world. We're trying to do that rather than letting just social democrats try to claim the mantle of socialism. So that's what we're trying to do. And it is a competition of ideas, and we're up against the reformists, as always, which again is not to say that communists are never for reforms, but we're not mere reformists. That's the distinction there. But yeah, I mean, it's the USA was like one of the biggest countries in the Cold War that was anti-communist. We have a real legacy of anti-communism. Even a lot of people who consider themselves left in the US are anti-communist. Parenti writes about this in Black Shirts and Reds, about the ABC left, anything but class, where they want to talk about anything but class conflict. So, I mean, that exists, and we're here to fight it. What can you do but try to fight against it? I consider them to be wrong, and so I'm going to put out information leading people away from them and trying to argue that they are wrong. So, it's what we can do. Yeah, the point of building a left coalition is to increase leftist forces. There will be a synergistic effect. We will multiply each other's effects. Once more events are held and there's, multiple banners of different, not just political parties, but unions and groups who have decided to say, hey, the Democrats have just been fucking us over decade after decade. It's time to move on, and we're doing it together. Because that's the thing I think that's been holding back the left from this fundamental thing we need to do, is breaking away from the Democratic Party and organizing in a space that's free of the influence of the rich capitalists who are destroying everything. We need a space that is free of them. That's never going to be the Democratic Party. And but you can't. People are too afraid to do that alone, and they're not even entirely wrong in that. Okay, you have a group of like 50 people. You're going to break away from the Dems and then drop off into relative irrelevancy. Okay, I mean, that's not even like an irrational thing to think. So we do it together, and that's kind of the point of the coalition. Is it's a lot easier to take that scary step away from the Democratic Party if there are more people helping each other out. Yeah, the Bernie thing, it did wake a lot of people up. Somebody said, exactly, I would never have gained the experience necessary unless I had volunteered and sunk efforts and cost just for them to steal it from him twice. I think you look at, not everybody went in the right direction. That was also part of why I started this channel, and it was a Facebook page before that, because you want people who get disaffected with the Democrats not to go join the Republicans or something. You look at, for example, Jimmy Dore, who I think used to be a much more sincere progressive. People who only became aware of him like last year or something might not know. If you look back at his coverage of like the 2015, 2016 Bernie primaries, there's a lot more sincere progressivism. It's not this like cynical MAGA libertarianism shit. But in the course of Bernie and all of us getting fucked over, I think that there was a sense with Bernie Sanders where like, okay, you had Bush and Cheney, and for people who are old enough, like if you're only like 30 today, you might not really remember Bush and Cheney real well. But those years, 2001 to 2009, pretty much starting with 9/11 and then ending with 2008, like it was fucking hell. And it really shocked a lot of people. The United States went through a massive transformation during that time, as far as the jingoism was very overt, more overt than ever. The Department of Homeland Security literally didn't exist before that. So all of the sort of domestic police and surveillance state got massively beefed up. It became like super normal again after, remember, in the 60s and 70s, the anti-Vietnam War sentiment. Any wars that they had to do after that had to be pretty covert. Otherwise, you risked rousing anti-war sentiment in this, later 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, obviously, it's the United States. It's the home base of imperialism. There's always going to be some of that. But as far as like a mass popular mobilization for it, much more difficult. Actually, George H.W. Bush, somewhat of a blip on the radar between Reagan and Clinton, and of course Reagan's vice president, and of course head of the CIA before that, and a congressman before that. But anyway, when he was president and they were doing the Iraq War and the Panama invasion and stuff like that, he said, "We finally kicked Vietnam War syndrome." What did he mean by that? It was they had started to break the anti-war sentiment. And so that was about 20 years after, like early 90, around 1990. They had started to finally break the 20 years of more significant anti-war sentiment. And then, of course, George W. Bush and Cheney followed up on that with, engineering some mass popular support for you had average people. I remember some guy I worked with. He was like foaming at the mouth like, we need to go invade every fucking country. It was like psychotic. And that was pretty, that's what happened during Bush Cheney. That was fairly common during the 2000s. Nobody even talks about these years anymore. I think it's repressed trauma, honestly. But that was a huge transformation. And then Obama came in, and he was supposed to be this massive progressive. And of course, they didn't undo fucking any of it. And so I think that there was something of a sense with Bernie Sanders that it was like, okay, you had all these progressives who supported Obama and were sincerely looking for deep change after Bush and Cheney because the U.S. was already too right wing. Bush and Cheney made it so much fucking worse with, of course, most of the Democrats rubber stamping it along the way or offering very weak resistance to it along the way. And, Obama got in and there was all this veneer of progressivism, but, honestly, quoting now complete sellout Cenk Uygur, but this was an apt quote at the time, it was change on the outside, continuity on the inside. That's accurate analysis, actually. So I think that there was this sense of Obama had been this fake progressive, but now we were going to get the real progressive. All the people who supported Obama and were disappointed could now support Bernie and not be disappointed because, he hadn't been a Democrat and this and that. And, of course, he, got screwed. We got screwed by the Democratic Party. And Bernie failed to castigate the Democratic Party for that betrayal. They completely fucked over everybody who supported him, volunteered time, donated money, whatever it was. They completely fucked over everybody supporting Bernie, and he stuck with the Democrats. That's fucking abuse. I mean, that's leaning into abuse. So Jimmy Dore, coming back around to that, was one of the people who I think went, completely lost his mind after that. And this is when he left the Young Turks around that time, or he still had a show on it, but it was sort of the dissenting show that did not go along with the main thing. And then, of course, TYT took the $20 million from a Democratic Party donor, and that was pretty much the end of TYT, to the extent that they were worth even half a shit before that. But anyway, so you see somebody like Jimmy Dore lose his mind, so now he has to keep his show, his independent show going, which, by the way, his URL, his handle on YouTube is youtube.com/TYT comedy. The reason it's TYT comedy and not the Jimmy Dore show is because it was literally just one of the sub-channels of TYT initially. So he had to make his own audience, and what did he do to do that? Did he go actually left and Marxist? No. He went towards libertarians and MAGA people. And I think that the downward spiral into fascism support ensued from that, because he was interested in showing up Cenk, he was interested in showing up TYT, and interested in making money. And so he kept his audience of, 200,000 people growing, and now it's up to 1 million people. And he didn't build his audience up to 1 million people. I mean, I think you can. You look at Second Thought or something, they're over 1 million people now. But he didn't build his audience up over 1 million people by going left. He did it by going into this contrarian, MAGA libertarian, Glenn Greenwald, Tulsi Gabbard. He went into all that shit. So the point is, when people get disaffected with the Dems, you know, catastrophe can ensue if they just go join the right. Channels like this are intended to pull people in the correct direction and not have them get just, you know, caught up in that merry-go-round of just one type of establishment politics or another. It's capitalism, you know, it's capitalism. And it's like everywhere you turn in the US, it's fucking capitalism. Oh, is there an alternative political party? It's probably capitalism. Like that's generally the rule. Like look at Andrew Yang. It's just more capitalist. It's like we're neither left nor right. No, you're fucking right. You're right wing. That's always when people say we're neither left nor right. They're always right wing. That's what libertarians say. So anyway, this is what we're trying to break people out of, is to make a left alternative that is actually left, you know? All right. Yeah, green capitalism is like low-tar cigarettes. I mean, it's going to attract some sincere people who are like, well, we need to do something that's more green. And most people don't know anything about capitalism. You know, those of you listening to this channel for a while, or similar channels, like, okay, you're going to know more about capitalism and why it's bad. You are definitely a fringe minority at this point. Like, we need to make this much more widespread knowledge so that the average person on the street, when they're asked about green capitalism, can, like, tell you the reasons. We're just not at that point yet. So, again, you know, I've used the hashtag Revolution 2030. We're in 2022. There's still time to, like, build up to this, and there's a reason I set it, you know, my expectations on kind of a 10-year timeline. I'm hoping we can get something going by the end of the decade. Did I say I had a video on how to create a new channel? Yeah, go look up the Bad Mouse Productions video. And then there's another one, like, I think just search on tips on the channel and it should come up. They're from July 2021. I remember specifically. Actually, if you just search on July, I think I put July in the title of that second video. So yeah, it's like an hour and a half, maybe combined. I think they're 2 45-minute videos, if I remember correctly, about just, you know, my thoughts at that time, and this was over a year ago, but my thoughts at that time on how to build up a channel. No problem for engaging with the troll, it's fine. But yeah, that's generally not how we do it. I think that the government will do anything to close the socialism movement as soon as it will be big enough to be a threat. Well, yeah, they always try to do that. That can't stop you from trying, though. You know what I mean? Like, if you just cede the class struggle, then where are you at? It just makes it easier for them to do what they're doing. So you have to be aware that capitalists are going to use the tools in their toolbox to come after us. But we can outsmart them. It's possible. Some of us will get nabbed, that's for sure. But, you know, people just living in constant fear is not it. It's not it. American suburbs are filled with some of the most selfish, willfully ignorant dipshits on earth. Yes. Yeah, you're entirely right. There's also some people who, and again, this is sort of like not all men, but like, yeah, and some people just are stuck there for one reason or another, but yeah, by and large, that would be the case. That said, though, I mean, again, like 70% of the country wants at least universal health care. Large proportions of people do want change to the system of some kind. Our goal is to max that out, get all those changes, and keep pushing, obviously, on to revolution. The system is going to throw up resistance to all these things. And I think, like, for example, you know, some people did get radicalized watching how the Bernie Sanders movement, that a lot of people really genuinely put their heart into, they believed in that. And then they watched how it happened. They're like, oh my fucking God, I'll never trust the Democratic Party again. Well, they came to the correct conclusion, in my opinion. And so, you know, channels like this exist to help those people, you know, who are like, hey, look, I was supporting Bernie Sanders. He was talking about socialism. Clearly, this isn't going to happen in the Democratic Party. What do we do next? Well, trying to help foster and facilitate a conversation on that. And there's people who've been, out there in socialist parties and stuff. That's why I'm always saying, this is a YouTube channel. You want to ultimately join a party or organization in your area. That's where the class struggle is actually occurring. But, this is sort of an extended book and discussion club. This is what we're trying to at least help foster that. At this stage, I think it's pretty valuable. And that's the feedback I'm getting. That's why I think that, I think that independently, and then people give me that feedback. So, yeah. Yeah, if the oil heiress is using her guilty family money to fund climate protests, good. Not everything is an op. Yeah. Yeah, that alone is insufficient. Because if that's the case, they can just donate some money to anything and discredit it. If you can't look beyond, take the fucking Alex Jones tinfoil hat off for 2 minutes. People are so afraid of getting conned. And to some extent that's fair, because it does suck to get duped, and it sucks to be lied to, and it sucks to believe a lie. But we need action, and people all just trying to be these too cool for school wallflowers of oh no man, I'm above it all, man. You don't get it, man. It's all an op. No, that's not helpful. We need more action, and no, a lot of it is not an op, actually. There are ops. But, look at some of the things that are probably most likely to be ops. There was that LaRouche conference, the Schiller Institute conference about MAGA communism on the 15th, just this week, I think it was Saturday. And, there's an op. It's people explicitly, well, what was the name of the conference? It was End Green Fascism. Okay? Does that sound environmentalist to you? No, it doesn't. It sounds like they promote unlimited growth, and they literally call environmentalists fascists. So there's your op right there. Not people protesting mass extinction of life on Earth. So somebody says, I'm not joking when I say we do need a multipolar world again, not just a nuclear war. A man can dream, though. Yeah, so actually, Jason Unruh at Maoist Rebel News had a recent video titled A Rant That Is Needed or something like that. And he talks in that about multipolarity. And it's the same thing I think I and other people I would consider to be sincere communists do believe, that don't get caught up in campism, is that multipolarity, okay, yeah, since the end of the Cold War, destruction of the Soviet Union, the world has been dominated by the United States and other countries in its orbit. So it's been unipolar, yes. And people have been talking for some time, even since the 2000s, about the end of unipolarity, where Russia didn't get as involved with anyway, there were the beginnings of the discussion of unipolarity, I remember in 2003 around the Iraq War. But unipolarity and multipolarity, as Jason was saying, multipolarity is not better, it's just different. So in multipolarity, you're less likely, perhaps, eventually at some point, to get the kind of war that the U.S. has been doing, the global war on terror, where it just goes around and bullies every country that it feels like raiding, unopposed, because there's no other major power to oppose it. That's what you get in unipolarity. And that's terrible, because why? It's imperialism. Okay. But multipolarity is still imperialism if the other major powers are not socialist. This is, you read Two Camps by Stalin. I have it up on the channel. It was at the end of World War I, and he's talking about how there's two camps, one imperialist, one socialist. Why? Because the Soviet Union had just been established. And he's like, well, now there are two great camps, imperialism and socialism, and now, class war is going on at a much greater level on the international stage, because now we control a whole country. But there is no anti-imperialism without socialism, not really. And that's where we're at today, is you just have multipolar imperialism. So you might be less likely at some point, as the other imperial powers, like Russia is still a small one, get bigger, that the U.S. feels like it can't just raid every country that it wants to. So you're going to get some client states of Russia which will also be capitalists, most of them, and then, well, because most of the countries in the world today are capitalist, but they're going to be allying with Russia not because it's anti-imperialist, but because they want resources that they can get out of an alliance with Russia. So you're going to be less likely to get some of that because some of these countries will fall into Russia's protection, for example, and the protection of any other large countries that wind up allying with Russia. China, so far, it's a bit up in the air as to what exactly they're going to do. But, that would certainly be a pretty, an alliance that the U.S. would really have to think twice about, before they just randomly invade other small countries after that. But you're more likely to get a war between those imperialists, which was not likely at all during the unipolar stage. So it's not better, it's just different. And the need remains for class struggle within every country on Earth. Yeah. Comment, I would like to do more publicly, but I'm in a very red part of Florida. Matt Gaetz is my rep, so you can guess. I'll totally admit that I'm too scared at the moment to do anything locally, especially with how everyone handled COVID here. I'm usually the only one wearing a mask when I go out now, aside from 1 or 3 old ladies, and it's been like that for months now. Yeah, somebody else says, me too, I'm in the panhandle, it's very lonely here. The teenagers are cool, but I'm nearly 30 and feel weird trying to propagandize children. Lol, even if I believe it's good. Yeah, I hear you. But, and again, it's like join a party, but half the time you say join a party, there is no party. So it's like you can join something at the statewide level or the national level, or you can join something like 2 or 3 counties over, but is that going to be like a daily part of your life? And that's the hard part. Again, we need to multiply forces. So, again, and I would like to hear feedback on this topic of a left coalition. I don't see what anybody has to lose because I don't think any of these parties are particularly in high gear right now, whether it's the Greens, PSL, CPUSA. Like, I know that there are membership bumps going on, but not at the level of mobilization where, half of these fucking groups can't even return a phone call when people call them up to become a new member. That's where the parties are actually at for the most part. So, getting serious and taking this to the next level, again, making a clear proposal here. Okay, so clarification on the environmentalism. The Greek Greens are pro-wind turbines. Capitalists destroy forests to install them. Forgive me for being a bit skeptical about that. I would just like to see more information about that. It's just, there's definitely wind turbines. They're not normally installed by wiping out a forest. So, they're usually put on, hills or ridges or, mountains and stuff, and as well as other places. But, all right, you sent me a message about it. I'll look at it, but I can't speak to that situation. There is also a case where we've discussed this previously too, like the example of Portugal, where the government has Greens but also alongside socialists and communists. That gives more of a socialist anchor for them to, because as we do know, there are green capitalists for sure. And, something like the German Green Party, I understand, is one of the most reactionary green parties in the world. With the Russia threatening to cut off the fossil fuel supplies this winter, they're calling for coal to be mined and stuff like that, not really green at all. And that's kind of a long-standing pattern. So there is that, but this is also when they're participating in governments just with many other reactionaries, to get anything, quote, done, then they're more likely to drift in that direction. If they're in more of a coalition with socialists and communists, then they're more likely to be have something on the left for them to work with. And that can bring out the better tendencies in a party like that. Like I said many times, I consider them just the beginning of the left. at least in U.S. politics, versus the Democrats. Democrats are definitely not in the left. No branch of the Democrats are in the left. I consider them the beginning of the left, but again, their right wing is highly problematic. So just to be super clear on that, because I feel like no matter how many times I can drench it in qualifications, which is how I think about it. Somebody will still try to come up with something trying to misrepresent that. And I'm honestly really tired of it, so stop. Ooh. As a general question for discussion purposes, what are some ideas on how to undermine and ultimately defeat capitalistic indoctrination? Well, that's a huge topic. I mean, we could do an entire stream on that. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to that too much today. But I mean, just drawing people into conversations like this. There are specific readings some people like. I like Einstein's Why Socialism. That's one, but that's something I like. So anyway, people are welcome to contribute suggestions in the comments on that. So we're kind of getting near the end of the stream. I'm probably going to just do like another 10 minutes. So let's get through the rest of the chat here, and then we'll wrap up. Obviously, I guess this was like fertile ground for discussion and good food for thought. And I was also in a mood to like go in at length about these topics. But yeah, we'll have to get to the other stories today. So it might be 4 streams instead of 3. Who knows? But we'll get to most of the rest of the stuff in the next stream. All right. I was one of those who got my eyes opened by Bernie. Learned a while. Oh, I think it's supposed to be whole lot. Learned a whole lot about how undemocratic the USA actually is. It was horrible to realize how much the power of our votes are undercut. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so I don't especially recommend that people go back to the 2020 S4A videos. But that was some of the stuff that we were talking about back in 2020. Again, I think current stuff is probably better to focus on. But yeah, I mean, back then it was like what Bernie could have done was, hey, you all out there see how the Democratic Party just completely fucked over the left. Obviously, as we've known for a long time, and as I have just proved conclusively, you can't do anything in the Democratic Party. That's why I'm inviting all of you who supported me to join the Green Party, which I also will be joining. Or alternatively, if you didn't want to join the Green Party, to join my new Labor Party that I'm starting today. And we're going to form a force that can actually force the Democrats to work with us until one day we actually overpower the Democrats. So that's like the obvious move, is to show how the system and the existing political parties that are controlled by capitalists cannot deliver these changes that people desperately want. That's the whole thing, is like showing the system can't deliver this stuff without massive force being applied to it. And even then, you're better off eventually just getting rid of the system as soon as there is public support for doing that, and logistically that becomes a possibility. He did not do that. Instead, he was like, yes, sir, may I have another, sir? And just got behind the Democratic Party. Coward, spineless, and probably consciously a sheepdog as well. But yeah, that was, and then AOC did the exact same thing. We had a story, I think it was fall of 2020, where AOC was kind of, somebody commented on it. They were like, AOC is having her what is to be done moment, where she's like, the Democratic Party is never going to do shit. And there was some article, I forget, it's like in the New Yorker or something about it. Actually, let me see the name of that video. I haven't thought about that one in a while. But yeah, it was like a prime opportunity for AOC to be like, look, I brought the ruckus to the Democratic Party. What I've seen on the inside, they're obviously never going to change. If you're interested in real change, then we need to form. I mean, think about that. I'm calling for a left coalition of all the existing parties that have been opposing the Democrats from the left for a long time. But think about, the star power of like an AOC, a Bernie. And yeah, of course, they're going to be bringing people. Oh no, this was last year. So the title of the video is AOC Working with Dems Likely Futile. S4A, detach from Dems 100% and move left for Revolution 2030. So this, I was saying this a year ago as well. The thumbnail is AOC Dems shaft progressives. So she'd made that statement. I was not like, that was correct information that I was presenting in that video. The problem is that her actions were not in line with intelligent things that people should actually do when you realize that Dems shaft progressives. They just keep feeding into it. In fact, they vocally, loudly oppose people who tell you not to join or support the Democratic Party. So, people eventually always bring up the topic of like, well, in my area, it's like the Republicans, it's like they're super dangerous, and I've, like the trans rights and this and that. And it's like, look, if you really feel like you want to vote in some particular way, you're going to do what you're going to do. My point is this, and I really want people who even vote Democrat strategically to hear this, is whether or not you think that the Democrats are going to temporarily be better than whatever monstrous Republican they're running against, things overall do not get better with decade after decade of the Democratic Party. So unless you want to be in this situation forever with things still getting worse and worse 20 years from now, we have to build something outside the Democratic Party, period. Okay? Whether you're tactically voting Dem right now, I'm not going to have that argument with you today. But we have to build something else if we ever want to have some situation that's different from this, because I can tell you, if you just keep feeding your energy into the Democratic Party, and I'm not just talking about voting, I'm talking about money, support, attention, time. If you keep feeding into the Democratic Party, then we're never going to get out of this situation, ever. If we don't build something separate from the Dems, we will be in this situation forever with things just getting worse and worse and worse. They're not an anti-fascist party. They're not an anti-imperialist party. They're not a pro-worker party. They're not a pro-abortion party. They are not a pro-LGBTQ plus party. They support most of this stuff only nominally, and only in relation to Republicans. And even that is, a lot of it's very feeble, half-hearted, and when our backs are turned or behind closed doors, they're working with them. They're fascist collaborators. They're not anti-fascist in any way. So if we want a better situation, you have to build something that is not the Democratic Party. All right? That's what I'm saying. So you want to vote tactically, that's up to you. But as far as building a party, you build a hub for class struggle, which one manifestation of that is elections, whatever. But we need to build something, a party, a hub of organizing that can do all kinds of prongs of class struggle, community struggles, ballot initiatives, like all kinds of things that is not directly tied to electoral representative politics. Now, again, there may be some areas where if a left coalition gets strong enough, you would be able to win some local seats or county seats or statewide seats or whatever. But that's not really the main thing. The main thing is building a network, a coalition of organized leftists for a mass movement that can actually maybe tap into the revolutionary potential for first major reforms, whatever we can get out of the government, and then eventually for a brand new system. But there's a lot of work there, and it involves building something that isn't the Democratic Party, because you can't lay the groundwork for that inside the Democratic Party. Capital will always destroy that. So again, if Bernie and AOC had taken the right lesson and led people away from the Democrats that had just fucked everybody over and where no change is possible within those parties, I wouldn't be criticizing them. I'd say that was the right move. Now, we could still say, well, they're not communist and therefore, we don't have identical politics. But I would still say that that was the right move. And they didn't do it. They didn't even do that. I swear that there was a point where Jimmy Dore was one of the better sock Dems. Actually, I distinctly remember at one point, I thought he was the best because he called Fidel Castro a hero. This was years ago. Yeah, he was way different 5 or 6 years ago. He really was. There's a video called The Jimmy Dore Deception. I did some commentary on it. I thought parts of it were really good, and then parts of it were Dem apologists. I think that Force the Vote was the last gasp of Jimmy Dore's dying progressivism, and I don't think he's really done anything right since. So, because it was saying, look, you have a chance to hold up the Democratic Party and get a concession that you will only approve Pelosi as Speaker if they put up Medicare for All for a vote. Now, that would have been the most media coverage that Medicare for All would have gotten, like, for quite a while before or since. And they refused to do it. They refused to rock the boat. Whether or not you think that was the best strategy, I mean, there hasn't even been an alternative strategy. So I think that was the last time Jimmy Dore was right about anything. He was wrong about other stuff before that, and he's been wrong about basic. He did the Boogaloo Boy thing like literally 2 weeks after that. So I see it as kind of like the last gasp of his progressivism, basically. But yeah, people may not realize he was definitely one of the, like, you know, he would call out more bullshit than maybe most of them. But again, he's completely lost to the right now. And he just, according to something he announced on his show, somebody showed me on Twitter, he went to that Schiller Institute conference with the LaRouche bags and the Pat Sox this past Saturday. And Jackson Hinkle's always on his show now. So, like, yeah, he's completely captured by the right at this point. But, yeah, I hear you. This was years ago. Bernie even handed over donations to the Democratic Party after he dropped out. If that's not some kind of scam, I don't know what is. Biden's presidency has been a failure. I mean, Biden, it's like fucking Ronald Reagan. It's like George W. Bush. And I see zero pushback from Bernie or any social democrat. I brought up Kyle Kalinske earlier, same stream. He literally said Biden has been the best president. What? Secular Talk said that Biden was the best president in his lifetime? That is fucking delusional. That's bad even for Kyle Kalinske. Wow. All right. 18th Brumaire was an excellent critique of bourgeois politics. Yeah, somebody asked me for like a summary of comments on the 18th Brumaire. There's literally too much to talk about. There's like a lot of sterling passages in the 18th Brumaire. Whether it's talking about the lumpen proletariat, whether it's talking about the way that the small peasant class was not truly, like, they were a class in that they had the same economic situation. They weren't a class in that they didn't engage in mass intercourse with each other and had no sense of themselves as a class, which is, I feel like, a lot of the gig economy now. It's like the working class of the U.S. almost. It's not the same situation for different reasons. But, yeah, it's like people almost don't interact with coworkers at this point. And there's, like, you get that sense of yourself as a class almost only through social media, rather than through, like, experience in, like, a large workplace. This is obviously not everybody, but there's some of that. I've been thinking of starting a leftist cooking club. Okay, Lumpen Line Cook. Get together and learn theory and teach cooking skills. So, again, I've been teasing cooking with S4A for a while, and I must confess, I wrote down some notes on it, and I've just been totally consumed with other things. But, yeah, getting together and learning theory and teaching cooking skills, which is one of the most useful practical skills you can have in your life. You can both eat healthier and save a lot of money by cooking for yourself. But I'm not sure how to get the word out. Kind of don't want to dox myself as a commie if I put an ad in the local gas station or on a light pole. Any thoughts? Let me come back to that. I don't have time to do that, but cooking club is, I think, a very good idea. No, we will not touch on the economic articles today. Somebody says consider a Zoom for when you're doing the cooking club. That could work. The lack of organizing in the suburbs could be why there's so many reactionaries out there. Again, I'm talking about, rather than rich all-white suburbs, the poorer, more working-class suburbs. Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of the things, this is just also, there's like a lack of sports clubs for adults. Like, you go to Europe, there's more just kind of like of a social life, for example. In the United States, it's like once you get into your 20s, or like you're just kind of expected to like work, drink a lot of alcohol, buy a house, and like drop out of society. Like, becoming an adult in the United States is not a fun thing, and it's almost kind of rare. It's almost like the most extreme individuals who retain any sense of like fun, creativity, individuality, like just any sort of, people's personal interests tend to get very conservative as people get into like their 30s, for example. People get really, really, really boring. And I think part of that is there's very few things for adults to do for fun that isn't just going out drinking, you know? So clubs and things like that. That's why I say to people, it's like, you know, versus doing nothing. If the options are doing nothing or at least seeing if you can meet other leftists through DSA, at least go for it. Again, we're in 2022. Maybe 5 or 10 years from now, there will be like a functional, strong, you know, communist movement. Between now and then, don't lose your mind, you know. But it's like, yeah, there's very little to do as an adult in this country, and people tend to become, you know, just they mow their lawn and like maybe they have a few like buddies over for like a barbecue or something, and it's dull. It's dull. Yeah, and you know, if you look through the history of socialist communist organizing, there would be bowling nights, there would be big, you know, cookouts, there would be community events, you know, put the social back in socialism. I watched 3 minutes of Hinkle at the LaRouche conference and couldn't get past that. 100% an op. Yeah, somebody was asking me, did you see video from them this weekend? I was like, no, I saw some pictures, but I didn't watch the video. Some fucking infracell dork like wrote no investigation, no right to speak. Give me a fucking break. Like, I haven't been covering them for like how long now? Like a year? Give me a fucking break. I just did like multiple videos on Jackson Hinkle. Pretty sure I've done some investigation there. It's a LaRouche conference titled Defeat Green Fascism. How much investigation do you need to do? Like, come on. But anyway, yeah, no, the other person I was replying to said that they watched it and there wasn't even like a trace of leftist framing about anything. Saudi Arabia would make for good socialism. Imagine Neom being in that system. I don't know who Neom is, but it's not what comes to mind. I mean, honestly, best wishes to Saudi Arabia and their, you know, liberation of working people, but it's not what comes to mind. Unless I'm missing something, if anybody wants to supply resources. Paul Sturm is planning to form a party in America. I like Paul Sturm a lot from what I've seen of them. You know, I haven't linked any channels on the YouTube. Like, you can, like, link other channels. They would probably, if I were to do that, I don't want to, like, commit to it, like, oh, but you linked this channel. And it's like, look, I'm just trying to branch out a bit. Anyway, if I were to link some channels, I would probably link Paul Sturm in the first 5 or 10 of them. Joining the Democratic Party requires to sell you your soul. Yeah, I haven't seen a case of it not happening yet. That's what they always use against you, the threat of the big bad Republicans. Yep. I've always been into art. I think that's kept me interesting. You're probably right about that. Somebody else says, oh my God, yes, thank you. It's been very hard for me mentally, quote, growing up, because apparently that means for most people to be serious. Like, I'm 34 now. I still miss our old friends' sleepovers just because. Last time was probably a decade ago at this point, outside of a special event scenario or gathering. Yeah, I mean, you know, I've also been in more sort of alternative scenes where people do art and music and stuff like that. And yeah, you can get a bit more of that playful spirit in things, but it's like, you know, I mean, there's no sports, there's not much of a social life in the United States. It's kind of weird. People, you know, I think what it is like people have kids and then like their entire social life becomes like about other parents in the school system that their kids go to school with. And it's like, but they're all, it's usually the same kind of just boring shit. Like, just drinking a lot and talking about your property value, and like that's that. All right, anyway, we're going to call it there for today. I've caught up with the chat. I actually feel like this was much needed for me and cathartic. And yeah, it's really weird if you're single and child-free trying to be social as an adult. So for sure, you are welcome. And thank you, everybody who joined the stream today. There's 41 viewers as we're signing off right now. And we'll be posting this up on the YouTube. We will be continuing with more streams. and I will post those chapters that I have of Anti-During Part 1. And yeah, so again, thanks everybody dropping in on the stream. This was a pretty good stream. Only one or maybe two trolls. And oh, yes, I knew there was something else, why I'm sort of repeating myself. Thanks to the current patrons. I've actually had a few patrons come in since this. Boy, that's way too big. And thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. Patreon.com/socialismforall. And I would make content even if nobody supported, but I can definitely spend... You wouldn't be getting like 2 or 3 streams a week if nobody was supporting, I can tell you that much. I can spend more time on it because people do support financially. So we have a lot more content coming up this week. Thanks to everybody again, and we will catch you next time.